Thank you, Presiding Officer. Figures released yesterday show that 1 in every 10 ambulances in Scotland sat outside hospitals for hours waiting for patients to be admitted. That means in just 1 week, 700 ambulances across the country were stuck outside hospital for hours. We've heard of reports of ambulances backing up, waiting outside Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, Ayrshire's Crosshouse Hospital and many more. So, Deputy First Minister, why are ambulances backed up for hours outside hospitals in Scotland?
Deputy First Minister.
Just before I answer Douglas Ross's question, I want to begin by putting on record this Government's thanks and very best wishes to Mark Drakeford as he steps down as First Minister of Wales, and pay tribute to his dedication in many years of public service. And despite our differences on the Constitution, Mark Drakeford has been a friend and ally to Scotland throughout his time as First Minister. He's never shied away from defending devolution and, of course, standing against the devastating effect of Brexit and Tory cuts, and working with others to improve cross-government cooperation. And I wish him all the best for the future. Important question on the Scottish Ambulance Service, which of course continues to experience challenges with waiting times for ambulances in a number of hospital sites across Scotland, and of course, as Douglas Ross spoke about, some are taking longer than they should to turn around at the front door of our hospital. Of course, similar pressures are being felt throughout the UK as we enter into winter pressures. Patient safety remains our top priority, and of course I would apologise to anyone who has either experienced any waits for an ambulance to reach them, or indeed has had to wait at too long in A&E. I want to also thank our staff, who of course are working extremely hard to maintain a fast response to our most critically unwell patients. Scottish Ambulance Service is working hard with health boards to minimise delays in handover times. And of course, as part of the funding for the winter plan, the Scottish Ambulance Service has received an additional £50 million to help address the increased
Cabinet
demand
Secretary.
for their
Thank
services
you.
going into winter.
Question number 2 from Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I also wish Mark Drakeford well. I'm sure he's pleased that a mention from the SNP is a positive one, because it's normally a critical one when it suits the SNP's argument. But Shona Robison was mentioning there that some of, well, you know,
members, let's hear Mr Ross.
It's true.
Members.
It's interesting, they don't like to hear it, but they use it every week.
Mr Ross, please ask your question. Thank you.
The Welsh Assembly. But anyway, the Deputy First Minister was mentioning that some of the waiting times are longer than they should be. So we've done an FOI request, and I've got the response here on ambulance waiting times across Scotland. They show some of the worst turnaround times on record. We can reveal that an ambulance was waiting outside a hospital in Ayrshire for 15 hours. Another waited over 10 hours in Grampian, and in the Lothian Health Board area waited over 11 hours. This government has known about the problem for years, so why does this scandalous situation keep on happening?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, as the Cabinet Secretary for Health said earlier on, of course we are, as part of the winter plan, in funding the Scottish Ambulance Service with an additional £50 million to help address the increased demand for the services going into winter. In addition to that, we are, of course, investing in Hospital at Home at £12 million to increase capacity to help to keep people away from the front door of our hospitals. The Cabinet Secretary earlier on talked about the action being taken at various health board areas, including Grampian, who of course are getting their share of the Hospital at Home capacity and are working hard to address some of the issues that Douglas Ross alluded to. Can I just say one thing though? The investment that I mentioned, the £50 million to address the increased demand for the services that have been given to the Scottish Ambulance Service, that is nearly 5 times the amount of money that the UK Tory government is giving for health in its entirety for the budget next year. So we will continue to address some of the very serious concerns here, and the Cabinet Secretary for Health had the annual review with the Scottish Ambulance Service yesterday, where many of these issues were addressed. But it's a bit rich for Douglas Ross to come to this chamber talking about the performance of our Scottish Ambulance Service, or indeed our health service more generally, when they have singularly failed to provide any funding for our health service.
Douglas Ross.
That's just not true. I don't know how many times the Deputy First Minister is going to come to this Parliament and make statements that are incorrect. But she referenced what the Cabinet Secretary mentioned earlier in response to Douglas Lumsden on ambulance waiting times. And the Cabinet Secretary mentioned something that the Deputy First Minister didn't. He mentioned the challenge of delayed discharge. And I wonder why Shona Robison didn't want to mention delayed discharge in her answer. Could it be that when she was Health Secretary 8 years ago, she promised to eradicate delayed discharge completely? That is a consequence of her failure and the government's failure to deliver on that pledge. Now, our FOI has also uncovered some shocking ambulance response times. Purple calls involve the most life-threatening, dangerous situation for patients. Half of the patients in that category have had a cardiac arrest, and these calls have a target response time of 6 minutes. Yet our FOI request reveals that some patients are waiting more than half an hour and others are waiting 10 times longer than the target. So, Deputy First Minister, why should anyone whose heart has stopped be waiting so long for an ambulance to arrive?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, first of all, on delayed discharge, I absolutely recognise the impact of delayed discharge, which is why, of course, the Cabinet Secretary for Health is working very closely with local authorities and health boards in order to address the impact that delayed discharge has. In terms of the point that Douglas Ross made around those most urgent category calls, it is absolutely important that those calls are responded to as quickly as possible. And, of course, in most cases they are. But I accept, as I set out at the beginning, it is not acceptable if someone is waiting too long for those calls. The median response for purple calls was in the performance information with the week ending 10th of December. The median response for purple calls was 7 minutes 32 seconds and for red 9 minutes 25 seconds. I accept that is too long, and I accept there will be people waiting outside of those times. What I will say, though, is that the investment that has been made in our Scottish Ambulance Service and in our health service is absolutely not down to any of the resources that are being given to us by the UK Government. Douglas Ross said earlier on about the investment in public services. I have it in black and white that next year all the money that is coming from the UK Government for health amounts to £10.8 million. That is enough for 5 hours capacity in the NHS, and actually it was only for smoking cessation.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister.
For frontline services. So I don't think Douglas Ross should come and lecture us here about the health service.
The UK Government has provided the biggest ever block grant to the Scottish Government to deliver for public services here in Scotland, and it's a failure by the SNP Government and the SNP ministers that is having an impact on patients. The Deputy First Minister speaks about them waiting a few minutes longer than the target. Some are waiting over an hour for a purple category call. That is unacceptable. And this isn't just impacting the patients. This morning I spoke to a paramedic who wishes to remain anonymous. He told us staff morale is at an all-time low. He described waiting in ambulances for more than 5 hours some days with unwell patients in freezing temperatures. He said paramedics want to do more for their patients, but staff are considering leaving because the situation is unsustainable. He said the Scottish Government's latest funding programme was supposed to ensure the right resources in the right place at the right time. But he wants to know how that can possibly be effective when he and his colleagues are sitting outside hospitals, unable to get in. Systematic problems are preventing frontline staff from giving patients the treatment they deserve. So what does the Deputy First Minister have to say to disillusioned NHS staff about this crisis?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we take the views of our frontline staff very seriously indeed, and of course that's one of the reasons that the Cabinet Secretary for Health, when he is doing the annual reviews, usually as when I was Health Secretary, we meet the frontline staff and hear their views, as he did yesterday with the Scottish Ambulance Service. What I can say to Douglas Ross is that Scottish Ambulance Service staffing is up 50% under this government, and we have record levels of investment in our health service, including in our Scottish Ambulance Service. That is in stark contrast to the real terms cut that the UK Tory government is giving the Department of Health in England, a real terms cut. And that, of course, flows through to the resources that this government has available for our health service if we were to follow the Tory choices. 10.8 million for our health service. Well, we, of course, will not follow UK Tory spending plans, and we will make sure we protect our health service and our Scottish Ambulance Service going forward.